Tasmania has not had passenger rail for nearly 50 years. The main lines have only seen freight and occasional heritage services since 1978, when the Tasman Limited pulled into Hobart Station after 20 years of service to the Tasmanian community. Now the final chance to return service on the main lines may be passing. Hi, I'm Tasmanian, and this is the last chance for passenger rail in Tasmania. A brief history of passenger rail in Tasmania. The first passenger line opened in 1871, linking the city of Launceston to the regional hub of Deloraine. The line was constructed and operated by the Launceston and Western Railway. At the same time, a failed line from Deloraine to Latrobe was constructed and abandoned shortly afterwards. In 1876, the Tasmanian Mainline Railway Company opened a line from the Hobart Central Business District to Evandale Junction on the line to Deloraine. This line was shortly extended to Launceston, but the first major trouble with the network started here. The main line had built their track to 3'6" narrow gauge track, while the Deloraine line was built to 5'3" broad gauge. In 1872, the Launceston and Western Railway was taken over by Tasmanian Government Railways, operated by the Tasmanian and Australian governments. The line to Deloraine was made narrow gauge by 1885, and 5 years later, the TMLR was purchased by Tasmanian Government Railways. Many branch lines all across the state were opened in the coming years, the most notable being the North East Line to Scottsdale, the Fingal Line to St Mary's, the Apsley Line, the Derwent Valley Line to Glenora, and the extension of the Western Line to the cities of Devonport, Ulverston and Burnie. By 1900, the west coast of the state was booming with mineral traffic and railways were being constructed everywhere, most notably between Strahan and Zeehan, as well as a large tramway network in the area. For the first time in the state's history, successful private railways were built on the west coast, the most notably being the Queenstown to Strahan Mount Lyell line, the Linda to Pillinger North Mount Lyell line, and the Waratah and Zeehan to Burnie Emu Bay Railway. However, the heyday of the railways passed by the 1940s, and many smaller branches began to close. Passenger services on lines were cut back, and it became clear that the Tasmanian Government Railways were struggling. This was most noticeable by 1974, when the popular and well-patronised Hobart suburban trains were cut. By 1975, Australian National Railways took over the Tasmanian network, and radical changes were put in place. Most passenger services were cut in 1975. The only remaining services were the Midland Motor from Hobart to Parramatta and the Tasman Limited, the luxury train from Hobart and Launceston to Wynyard. Both of these were cut in 1978, and no passenger services remained in Tasmania. Since 1978, a variety of private and public owners have controlled the rails of Tasmania. Australian National gave way to AN Tasrail, then AN Tasrail fell to Australian Transport Network Tasrail, which in due course ceded the Tasmanian network to Pacific National, until finally, in 2009, government-owned Tasrail took ownership of the network. In the previous decades, lines were closed, tracks fell into disrepair, and heritage operators were banned from all of Tasmania's public network in 2004. Only the main south and western lines, along with a few minor branches, survive. Freight traffic is the only thing carried on Tasmania's rail network nowadays. This culminated in 2014, where the worst blow to the Tasmanian railways in history came: closure of the railway into Hobart. In 2014, the Brighton Transport Hub opened a new multimodal freight loading and rail maintenance facility. This, in Tasrail's mind, rendered the tracks between Bridgewater and the Central Business District useless, so that track was closed. The last train ran in the winter of 2014. This was done with little thought to the future of the corridor, which runs through some of Hobart's densest and busiest areas. The state and local governments now have to decide on what comes next. Because of this, for the last decade, a massive fight has been brewing between supporters of a bus rapid transit system up the main corridor and supporters of a light rail or tram line from Hobart to Granton. This is where we come to our first problem. Did you notice anything about both of these solutions? That's right, they won't allow for any trains to run into Hobart CBD and won't connect with the existing freight network at all. But to answer why all the plans for Hobart are so, well, wrong, you need to go back and look at the true problem for Hobart's future rail links, the Bridgewater Bridge. For over a century, various bridges have carried rail traffic over the Derwent River between Bridgewater and Granton. However, as part of the latest iteration of the Bridgewater Bridge, the rail link across the Derwent will be pulled up and abandoned, leaving the track from Granton to Hobart isolated, and anyone who knows anything about Tasmania's rail history will know that isolated lines here don't do well. In fact, the track from Granton onto the bridge has already been pulled up, as this Google Street View imagery shows. The bridge is scheduled to be open later this year, 2025, and despite some frankly embarrassing setbacks, the project appears as if it will be completed soon enough for the government to be happy. The bridge will carry the National Highway 1, which runs from Launceston and Burnie through the Midlands to Hobart. This bridge will, despite its massive budget, not carry any rail-based traffic, which is a shame, as the link through the Bridgewater could have been a massive help for a future heavy or light rail link to the far northern suburbs and could have made it feasible for a connecting heavy rail service to Launceston or the northwest coast to work. However, a direct link to the city is better. Overall, the creation of this new bridge without any rail alongside it is a shame, and even just keeping the old bridge for local road and rail traffic would have been hugely beneficial for the communities of Hobart's northern suburbs. Our next problem now emerges, that stadium, the stupid Macquarie Point Stadium, Tasmania's biggest waste of money. Just don't build it. The land it sits on is the site of the former Lower Rail Yard at Hobart, a freight and maintenance yard. While that is not effective use of inner city land, a 10-minute walk from the central business district, neither is a stadium. As this is the end of the existing rail right-of-way, I'd suggest turning the area where the stadium is planned to be into a transit-oriented development with a long-distance terminal in the centre of the precinct as a terminus for both suburban and regional services. Suburban services could run from Macquarie Point to Brighton and New Norfolk by the existing rail corridors, while regional services could continue to Launceston and Burnie, stopping at small towns along the way. Macquarie Point, however, is in the current state far more likely to become the biggest waste of money in Tasmanian history. The latest reports state that the cost of a stadium would be over $1 billion, even without transport, development and maintenance included. Tasmania is already in several $1 billion of debt, which could skyrocket in the next few years if this is built. I'm going to stop looking at all the problems about this for a while and focus on a small positive, if only it's hypothetical. What routes would there be in the case of this new Hobart Macquarie Point terminal? In my proposal, there would be a suburban service running all stops to Brighton, serving most suburbs in northern Hobart. There would also be an express service only stopping at Moona, Glenorchy, Claremont and Bridgewater before turning onto the Derwent Valley line and a reopened extension to New Norfolk. Regional services would only stop at Glenorchy and Bridgewater before stopping at major towns including Campania, Parramatta, Ross, Campbelltown, Canara, Evandale, Western Junction and Launceston. Services to the northwest coast would deviate from this route at Western Junction and stop at more towns including Perth, Longford, Westbury, Deloraine, Railton, Devonport, Turners Beach, Ulverston, Penguin, Heybridge and Burnie. I would say that if we were to use diesel-electric trains capable of 150 kilometers an hour and track upgrades to the existing services, that A train to New Norfolk would take 40 minutes, a service to Brighton 25 minutes, to Launceston 2.5 hours, and to Burnley 4 hours. These times are fairly competitive with driving and extremely competitive in comparison with existing public transport on these routes. Now back to more negativity. The next problem faced is an operator. Who will run the services? Tasrail has shown no interest in running a passenger rail service in Tasmania, and none of the heritage operators are even close to having the budget to run a frequent service on the main line. I would suggest that a new government-funded body is founded to run passenger services in Tasmania. A train similar to the Amtrak Aero could be successful in Tasmania's fledgling networks. With their diesel-electric engines and fast, sleek, modern bodies, a train like the Aero could be the key to unlocking Tasmanian rail potential. The suburban lines on Hobart could be electrified in the future, but designs for that will drastically change before that could be even considered. However, there is a problem. There is no current manufacturing body in Tasmania with experience in constructing passenger trains ever since Launceston Workshops closed in 1995. The small facilities at East Tamar Junction could not construct or maintain a large fleet of passenger locomotives and carriages, especially as they would be operating out of Hobart. Tasmania would need a new dedicated construction and maintenance facility. I would locate this in the Derwent Park Industrial Estate on the abandoned Risdon line. There is an intact right-of-way connecting to the south line at Derwent Park, about 800 metres away, with ample space for a maintenance facility and depot in the current site of De Bruyn's Transport Truck Base in between Gormanston Road and Sunderland Street. Alternative sites could include an extension to the Brighton Transport Hub, or a depot and maintenance facility somewhere between Bridgewater and Brighton. However, a depot in Derwent Park is preferable as it reduces the amount of empty running that is needed to operate services. The next problem emerges with frequency. After the closure of the passenger network, the suburban railway line in Hobart was single-tracked and a shared path was built beside the alignment. This is a problem. My suggestion, although it probably won't be very popular, is to close the shared path and instead open bike lanes and widened footpaths along Elizabeth Street, Newtown Road, and Main Road, which parallel the railway along the alignment between Granton and the city. This can allow for duplication between Bridgewater and Macquarie Point if they can get a railway across the Derwent. Strategic passing loops between Bridgewater and Brighton and New Norfolk can allow for increased frequency there. Passing loops will also be installed along the long-distance lines at stations. My personal opinion is that it will be feasible to run a train every 20 minutes off-peak and 10 on-peak on the Brighton line, and every 30 off-peak on the New Norfolk service, and every 15 during peak. This would mean that from Glenorchy to the Hobart CBD, excluding regional trains, there will be 10 trains per hour between 7am and 9am, between 4pm and 6pm on weekdays. Outside of that, Glenorchy would get 5 trains per hour to Hobart in the off-peak and on weekends and public holidays. This is a very reasonable and respectful frequency, comparable to stations on the Melbourne and Sydney networks. Building transit-oriented developments where new homes and facilities are constructed near railway stations could hugely bolster traffic on the line. I'll suggest the following suburbs for transit-oriented development: Newtown, Derwent Park, Glenorchy, Montrose, Rosetta, Claremont, Austin's Ferry, and Granton. Due to the problems caused by Australia's major housing crisis, developing new medium and high-density suburbs close to transit can benefit far more people than leaving stations as they are now. The next thing I will do is have a look at an alternative Hobart light rail and the effects on the bus systems caused by both this light rail and the heavy rail. There are several options on how to create a light rail service that does not use the existing rail corridor. I will propose 3 lines. The first will run from Glenorchy Station to Hobart Station via Elizabeth Street, the second from Lower Sandy Bay to Hobart Station, and the third from Shoreline Central to a Franklin Square over a rebuilt Tasman Bridge, which is due by 2055. This could serve the inner suburbs and part of the eastern shore of Hobart, as well as linking to a large ferry network that Hobart could sustain in the future. Bus routing would obviously need to be modified as part of these network changes, with buses in regional towns stopping at their railway stations as well as the town centres, as well as local buses in Launceston and Hobart being redirected to terminate at their railway stations instead of shipping containers on the side of the road. Maybe free shuttle buses could run between railway stations and the town centres of regional towns as part of a timed connection with a train. Creating timed interchanges between buses, light rail, and heavy rail in city centres can allow for easy traffic flow between passengers that require transfers and allow for a much more efficient system that would likely lead to higher patronage. Overall, creating more suburban interchanges, especially in Launceston, can seriously cut travel time for passengers in all modes of transportation due to the roads being cleared of buses stopping on the street. The tourism potential of rail service in Tasmania is immense. The beautiful scenery and weather, paired with the lack of roads and other major infrastructure surrounding some of the more remote lines, can make for a beautiful experience. Routes that could never sustain general passenger service, like Burnie to Rosebery, would be run as a joint local travel and tourism service. The track between Primrose and Ridgely is some of the most scenic in Australia and could be a large tourist drawcard for their region. Another area with beautiful scenery along the rail corridors is the northwest coast. The track between Ulverston and Burnie winds past beaches, historic towns, and cliffs. Paired with a relatively high population density of the northwest coast, a service perhaps running hourly to half an hourly between Devonport and Burnie on the existing track could work out and allow passengers to gain easy travel through the beautiful scenery only accessible by the railway and small back roads. Special heritage steam specials running along the line would be a valuable tourist asset and would give the area more prominence and knowledge in Tasmania and Australia. A future reopening of the closed line from Burnie to Wynyard could offer direct connections to Burnie Wynyard Airport, which is situated beside the railway. An upgrade of this airport could see direct flights to Sydney, as well as the existing services to Melbourne and the Bass Strait Islands. Burnie Wynyard could become the major gateway to the northwest coast, with fast and direct rail and road links to the major towns and scenic attractions of the area. The next thing we need to do is discuss a station location, layout, and links in Launceston, Burnie, Hobart, Devonport, and several other locations. Firstly, we'll look at Launceston, the second largest city in the state. There was never a railway into the CBD, services always ending at a terminus about a kilometre from the city near City Park, which was closed long ago. There are two main options to build a new rail link into the CBD, the ideal but more expensive option. The other option, which I will use in this scenario, is to open a station at the existing facility at East Tamar Junction. There is already a station and platform here, but they are not long enough to support the trains that I will envision being used on these services. Two new platforms in a side platform arrangement could be built at East Tamar, with an underpass to the end of Cypress Street. A new Free Tiger bus route could run from the station to the city and to the Inverness precinct, running every half hour, coinciding with train arrivals and departures. Next, we will look at Devonport. Devonport's station site is long gone, so I'll choose a new one. The best location I can find in the city is Roundhouse Park. 3 platforms would be built, 2 through and 1 terminating. The 2 through platforms would be on an island platform closer to the river, while the terminating platform will be opposite, near the road. A passing loop will be built around the island platform with a dead-end track from the north linking with the 3rd platform. No public transport modifications will be required, as this site is a 3-minute walk from Devonport bus interchange. The next site I will look at is Ulverston. There will be a side platform arrangement on a passing loop situated at the end of Victoria Street, with entrances onto Victoria Street, Wongie Lane, and Alexandra Road. This is adjacent to Ulverston bus interchange with easy links to the buses. Next, Burnie. Burnie Station was demolished in 2015, but the Burnie rail yards still have a lot of potential sites for a station. I think 2 terminating platforms in a side platform arrangement is best for this location. I will place the station in a car park at the intersection between Catley Street and Marine Terrace. The next station I will look at is Ross. Ross is a small regional town on the Hobart to Launceston route. I'll have services from Hobart to Burnie skip this station on a passing loop, while Hobart to Launceston trains stop at a single short platform located between Butterhoss and High Streets. Only a couple of carriages could stop at this short platform, which I've made about half the length of the other platforms and stations I've explained so far. I will now finally draw up a design for Hobart Station and Macquarie Point. I will have the double track suburban line coming up down past the regatta grounds, turn around the hill to the old freight yard. There will be 4 platforms across 2 islands at this station located close to the cenotaph, with footbridges connecting them to a station concourse where tickets and green cards, which I will use for all payments on this network, can be purchased, and with easy links to transit-oriented developments at Macquarie Point, as well as a new bus interchange. This brings us to the end of this video. I hope you have learned something about rail in Tasmania and might understand that returning passenger rail to Tasmania is crucial for the future growth of the state. If you made it this far, you probably either enjoyed this video or you hated it so much you watched the whole thing so that you can get enough problems to put in your comment. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this video and I will see you next time on Tasmanian.